A look at providing security in a strike situation, next on ProForce. Hello everyone, I'm Holly Hayes. Welcome to ProForce. Providing security in a strike situation can be both difficult and highly stressful. In this program, security officers will be provided information about what to expect and how to react when providing security during a strike. Topics covered include maintaining a professional attitude, documenting strike activities, and utilizing strong observation skills. Here to discuss strike security is Stephen Druschel, National Strike Liaison Coordinator for American Protective Services. But before PSTN's Dave Smith talks with Steve, let's look at a video depicting the role of a security officer in an often tense strike situation.
I think violence is pretty rare in a labor strike. I've heard some people say the riot was planned, and others say it was just a spontaneous outburst. It really doesn't matter much why it happened, as long as security didn't trigger it by something we did. It's easy for us to feel caught in the middle in a situation like that. We have to keep in mind that we're hired to protect the company's property and the people who work here. And we do that by observing and reporting and following established procedures. In other words, our basic responsibilities don't change during a strike. Generally, people have the right not to work and a very basic right to express themselves in public. Whether or not we approve of what they're saying or how they're saying it, we can't deny them free speech. It's a right guaranteed us all by the Constitution. The security officer's duty is mainly to follow procedures and report what happens. We put in some long hours. There were long stretches of boredom broken by a few tense episodes. Two things brought us through it, I think: sound preparation and the professional attitude of our security people. During the first couple of days, the pickets worked themselves into a frenzy. It was difficult dealing with the tension, but we stuck to the procedures in our instructions, and they worked. It was a little harder dealing with our own feelings. First, we were outnumbered by the demonstrators, and you can't help feeling a little nervous in a situation like that. But it soon became clear that we weren't going to have to fight a mob. They were mainly making noise. We suffered a lot of insults at first. But when they caught on that we weren't going to react, they eased off. We kept following our procedures to the letter in order not to let careless habits develop. And we continued to record everything that happened. Sometimes there seemed little point to it, but these records were valuable in planning defensive strategy. And later, some of our logs were used as evidence in court. See, the trouble is, you never know exactly what information you'll need, so you have to log in every little thing that happens. One day, the whole thing seemed to come to a head. I was on the gate with Doug. It started out like a routine procedure, maybe a little more agitated than it had been lately. Then,
Come on! Leave me alone! I want that son of a bitch! Come on! Come on! Come on! You all right? Yeah, I'll live. Did you see what that SOB did? Yeah, I saw it. Okay, come on! Yeah! Hey, wait. Take it easy. All right. Okay, look, let's report this and see what can be done.
Well, it was a mess. The officers called for reinforcements, we had the tax squad out, and they made a bunch of arrests. Fortunately, no one was seriously injured. Doug and I had to testify in court. It went pretty smoothly, though, because we both wrote up our observations right away in exactly the form we were taught. They couldn't shake our testimony.
Well, you know, Steve, we've just seen the strikes can sure get out of hand, and I think it's certainly everybody's nightmare when a strike occurs. The employees, management, and especially security officers end up in a real bind. I mean, a lot of issues come up there. What's your first bit of advice to a security officer when they hear that there's going to be a strike at a facility they work at?
Well, the first thing is there should have been some pre-planning. And they should be aware of what the strike plan is. Many times security is kind of left out of the loop until the end. They say, now you're going to go do this. But a good security professional should look into what the strike contingency plan is. If there isn't one, then try to move in the direction that they can develop some kind of a thing, even if it's only on the security level. The first thing I've encouraged security officers to do is to look into the history of the company, find out what types of problems they've had and how often they've had strikes and what the issues have been. The next thing is find out who the bargaining units are and what their history is of violence or nonviolent picket activity. That gives you a sense of order when it comes time to deal with the online stuff.
And you know who all the players are.
Right, yeah.
Now, you've been involved in dealing with strikes since the 70s, kind of just by happenstance, I guess, and it's made you an expert by necessity, right?
Yeah.
Now, have you seen a big change in strikes over the years? Are the strategies and tactics of the strikers changing?
I think that there's been a mode like last year, for an example, it was the fewest strikes that had ever occurred in the history of the United States in like 40 years. Now it seems that the trend is changing. There's more issues to be resolved between management and labor. So I would say for the next couple, 3 years, you're going to see a lot more activity on strikes.
So it's a real threat that's coming on the horizon here. All right, you talked about you're preparing, the strike occurs. As it goes down, what's the first effect on the relationship between the employees and the security that you're going to notice, or that the officer is going to see? Well,
the first thing they're going to see is this, it seems like every time we get into a strike situation, security officers end up being the line responsibility, the source for control of access and doing the documentation for the picket line activities and supporting management. And even though they're not and they're trying to stay neutral, they end up with that role.
Right.
So you have Fred, who's out on the picket line, and you're in the same scout troop with his kids as well as yours. That damages that relationship. It does have some impact, and it's a very, very touchy situation, and it doesn't resolve itself easily.
Right, and there are things a security officer can do, I suppose, that aggravates the situation too, right?
Well, there are, because one of the things that, you know, prior to the strike, you'll notice that there's certain people that start talking and agitating about management wants this, the rank and file wants this. The best thing a security officer can do is stay neutral. Do not get into the discussions of what management says and what the rank and file wants. If you can try to stay neutral in that regard, I think it's one of the things that will help bond that relationship.
Right, and speaking of relationships, once a strike occurs, oftentimes, you know, we're telling security officers how important it is to build good rapport with literally everyone at a site. Now the strike occurs, people who they have made friends with are going to be on the opposition. What advice do you give security officers for that emotional response?
Well, Dave, that becomes a real emotional issue, and the only thing that I can say is by trying to stay as neutral as possible, maintain a good professional attitude, do not develop that attitude that I have a side to choose, and by all means, don't get into conversations about issues on a picket line. If you happen to have the responsibility of being on an access control point where there are pickets, do not spend time discussing what's going on inside the facility or how you feel about what's going on the outside, because as soon as you do that, you start drawing lines, and that breaks down that relationship you used to have.
Right. One of the things, though, is there a problem if the security officers begin to continue to try to build rapport with people on the picket line? you know, there might not be a violent nature, but let's say, like you've said in the past, you know, here, there's the guy that's your kid's scoutmaster, and he's carrying a picket. Is it okay to still carry those liaisons on, or what do you consider advice for that?
There's two schools of thought on that. One side says that, you know, you should carry on your normal lifestyle as if this picket activity wasn't occurring. I kind of lean towards the other side, where it says that during this time, if you need to separate yourself from the issues so you don't get into the discussion. So I use what we call a code of silence. And when you're on that picket line and your friend comes up to you and tries to get information or chats with you, you should not get into those types of situations, because it does compound.
Maintain that professional demeanor, but
you have to keep that arm's length and keep detached from what's going on, because he's emotional. He's having a real tough time.
Right.
And he wants your support. And if he can get your support, then he feels better about what he's doing. Yeah, so you have to stay neutral.
Well, the nature of strikes is they are conflictual. Emotionally, some are just emotional, some are physical.
Oh, yeah.
And I know that sometimes there's strategies that strikers will use to instigate situations. What are things, what are those cues that a security officer should watch out for, that they don't get trapped into creating a violent confrontation? And that's what the strikers want.
Exactly.
Is security to trigger
here's a couple of things that I've noticed in my experience. The first line is to stop the replacement workers from crossing the picket line. And if they can succeed in that, then they stop and slow down the work and the production of the facility, which hurts them financially. The other thing, if they can get into a situation where they deteriorate the security force and break down the unity, then that also causes management some real serious heartburn. News media is great for coming out, shooting footage of the security officer with his hands in his pockets doing something stupid with a picket, or a picket provokes a security officer and he retaliates. Well, they only see the reaction, they never see the action.
Right.
And so once you see the security officers have broken down their professional demeanor, then it's obvious that the strikers are winning.
Right, and this is, and again, we're not going to pretend there's any easy solutions to any of this, because they are by nature difficult issues. One other thing, though, officers are going to be given personal, verbal abuse.
Oh,
I mean, you're
absolutely.
going to be told things. What advice? What would you tell them?
Well, here's the real problem. You have to be a fairly strong individual, and you have to realize one thing going in. These people are going to be going through a stressful time, and the picket personnel are. Their home life has been disrupted, their financial picture has been adjusted, they're into their savings if they have any, and they are going to be looking at you as part of the problem rather than the solution. So you're going to have to be a lot more sensitive to that. And it's an issue that is not going to be solved easily. It really isn't.
Right, but don't take it personally. Don't
take it personally.
It.
Don't get into a thing because somebody says something about your wife or your kid or you personally, or spits on you. That's not the real person doing that.
Right.
It's a high stress situation. The best thing I can advise is to kind of stay out of those situations. Don't get yourself close enough to a picket line activity unless it's imperative that you adjust something that's going on out there. Stay away from it. Stay back far enough that you don't get into those.
Well, you've been involved in so many strikes. What do you see? What is the odds of a officer being assaulted, of a security officer actually being physically assaulted?
Generally, if the deployment program is set up properly, you won't have to put the security personnel in that type of a situation. Normally there's special security entities that will come in and take care of those physical situations, moving vehicles through a picket line.
Tactical teams will be brought in.
Right. But if your management decides that there's things that you'll have to do that will bring you into physical contact with the pickets, then there is a good chance that you will be jostled, you will be knocked down. We've had officers pushed down and almost pushed underneath vehicles by picket personnel. Some of it was intentional, some of it was unintentional, but it's the same result. So you have to be aware that you can end up with a serious physical contact.
What's your advice for a security officer that is assaulted?
Once they're assaulted, they have to make sure that they do some very extensive documentation, and they need to take it to a couple of different areas. One is there may be some criminal actions that may be levied on this thing. The other thing is a civil action. I encourage people who have been assaulted on a picket line to go civilly as well as criminally, because we want to send a message that you may get off on the court system, but civilly you're going to be held responsible. And that's one of the things that I say, that we all should be held accountable for our actions, regardless if it's emotional or not.
You bet. Now, one of the things I know you advise is videotaping the actual riot or the strike scene, especially when it deteriorates. Partly one of the things to help prosecute and to litigate in a civil action? Exactly.
Well, one of the things that professional video does for a picket line is it keeps the pickets at bay. They don't like video. They don't like to be on film. The second thing it does is it gives enough information, the documentation, the security officer, plus the videotape support, to get injunctions. And injunctions are very important to maintain a non-violent atmosphere. If you can, if you've got 30 or 40 people out there, you've got 30 or 40 different personalities. And you know how quickly one person can start a riot. And if you've got 29 people backing him up, you've got a real serious problem. So we find that by doing the video and by doing the documentation, we can diffuse that to the point that maybe the injunction will only allow 3 or 4 people on a picket line.
Right, a judge will often react very powerfully to a video.
And we find that without video, your opportunities of getting an injunction in many states around our country is nil to none.
Right, because a lot of times the judge is going to say, for instance, this is a bunch of teachers on strike. Yet you're telling me, when we were preparing for this program, that was one of the roughest strikes you ever worked.
Exactly, and nobody, and the judges didn't believe it. I mean, when we took the video in and we laid it down in front of him, he was shocked. His kid was going to that school.
See how violent the teachers could be.
And he couldn't believe that gym teacher was saying those things on video.
Holy smoke!
So it really brings it home as to what type of an emotional levels are developed.
Well, this is a good warning to security officers out there. Just because you're going to the Pacifist International strike doesn't mean they're not going to try to kick some tail while they're there. That's
exactly,
right. That's
exactly,
right.
Yeah.
But this is this is fascinating, because I know this is such a difficult topic, and as you've said, there's no easy answers. But the security officers doing their job, documenting, getting photo documentary, video documentary, but also being willing to go and testify. That's an important thing, too.
Exactly. One of the things that I encourage the officers to do, because they will be called upon to testify, we had several officers this time go down for criminal actions against pickets. And the thing that saved them was getting a composite of that action that they were involved in, reviewing it, making sure that their notes correlated with the information in their testimony. And when they went into the prosecutor's office, they had their notebook. And one of the things that I encourage every single officer to do is carry that little pocket notebook and write down everything that happens. Because if they don't, you can't retrieve it once it's gone.
That's right.
And you can always bring it forward and throw it away after it's done.
Well, they hear us always nagging them, write good reports, but also maintain your records and your notes. Your notebooks are evidence, actually.
I have notebooks that go back to 1977 on strikes.
That's great. I'll tell you. Now, one of the things, there's a couple issues here that I had never thought about before, that when we were doing the pre-production in this program. It's often frustrating. Security officers will see the law enforcement officers will not take an action when you see a crime occurring. Why is that, and how do you deal with it when you see that?
Well, this is a tough one, Dave, because what you have here is you have a police officer who is there to serve and protect, and he shows up on the situation, and who is he going to serve and protect? Now, even though we as security officers see a crime committed, somebody breaks out a window, somebody pulls somebody out of a truck, there's a jostling contact, physical thing going on, the police show up. They want to keep things under control. The first thing they don't want to do is they don't want to make a martyr out of this guy.
Right.
And so the second thing they don't want to do is they don't want to yank him off, making a martyr out of him, and then incite more problems. But then the other side of it is, if they don't take him in, then there was no crime.
So they accelerate the
criminal activity. So it's a real tough job, and I'm glad I'm not a police officer anymore.
Right, and and I'm sitting here thinking, I see the paradox here, because you're, a police officer, especially the commander at the scene, is going to say, look, I'm entrusted with the overall piece in this entire context. The security officer is saying, look, I just saw him smash a window, arrest that guy. And it's tough now, but one of the things we both know, if a security officer sees say for instance a driver being drug out of a truck, there should be a TAC team assigned to rescue people, right?
Exactly. And one of the philosophies that I hold, and I think that it's a very positive one. We often lose control of ourselves emotionally when we see that type of activity going. So you take your TAC team, you move in, and many times what they will do is they will try to remove the picket. Well, my suggestion is never do that, because now if you have a confrontation out there, you take that picket on, there isn't enough of you to take on the entire picket line. So my philosophy has always been, you go out, if that employee was removed from his vehicle or decided to get out of the vehicle on his own, we remove him. There's only one of him.
It's a rescue then.
It's a rescue.
That's right.
We leave the vehicle alone, we get him back behind the lines, we let things cool off, and then we send the team out to remove the vehicle. You'll run into a lot of different issues like that. They'll stall vehicles on a picket line. They'll come in, they'll take the keys out of the vehicle, they'll lift up the hood, they'll say that, and then the police have to come out and tell them to move, and then they, oh gee, it starts, and away they go.
And you've seen all this before, right?
Oh yes. One of the things that officers need to look for is picket jacks. There's these little, they look like crow's feet. They throw them out, trucks run over them, flattens tires, that type of thing. They're very innovative with the types of things that they can punch your tires with.
Well, that brings up the whole issue then. As the line security officer out there, you have to communicate then everything you're seeing to the command post so they know when these things are happening.
We set up a central command unit, and so we don't have a lot of paperwork on the picket line. When there's an action or a picket violation, we have that officer contact the central command. Central command takes note of it, and then they do the reporting, and they put it all on computer. So we have a continuous log of all activities.
Right. Do you recommend weapons being carried on the line by the security officer?
Absolutely not. I have found that in my some 56 strikes that I've been involved in preparing for and instituting, I have never found one incident where I've had to issue any type of a weapon. What I find is when you go in with that type of an attitude, you escalate the other side. It's kind of like conventional war turning into a nuclear war. If you're out there even with a baton, the next thing you know is the pickets will have sticks,
right.
Baseball bats, all these types of things. So it's better to just go in using your tools and your mind.
Right. So I guess we should summarize this. What are the three primary things you want the security officer to do during a strike?
Well, first off, the most important thing is maintaining a professional attitude and keeping a very open mind. The second thing is it's really important to keep that observation skills at their peak. And the third thing, and finally, is the documentation is probably the most critical thing that they'll ever become involved in, because no matter how small of a situation, it's got to be put down. Let the management sort it out. Let the attorney sort it out. If you don't write it down, it didn't happen.
Right, and I think that's something that in this situation you may be dealing with what turns out to be a very spend years in court over a litigation.
Well, yeah, I mean, we had one strike where it was 1.5 years. They were still trying to put the pieces together.
Right, I'll tell you, these are tough topics, they're good topics. I guess one final thing is make sure if you see something that they're concerned about, contact their supervisor, always communicate what they're seeing, and be sure to document. I'll tell you, Steve, great advice. I'll tell you what, thanks for telling us all this.
It's great to be here.
Thanks, Dave and Steve. That was very helpful information. And that concludes our look at strike security. We hope that you have found our program to be interesting and educational. And as always, we encourage you to send us your comments and your suggestions. Your opinions are important to us. I'm Holly Hayes, and we'll see you next time here on ProForce.